October rain lashed Interstate 80 like bullets from heaven. Lucas Reed's weathered hands trembled against the cracked steering wheel, his ancient Ford limping through sheets of water that turned the world into a blur. In the back seat, 7-year-old Chloe stirred restlessly, her small fingers clutching a threadbare rabbit, golden hair plastered against tear-stained cheeks. "Daddy, I'm scared," she whimpered, lost in dreams that mirrored their waking nightmare. "Almost home, princess," Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury, though the 43 crumpled dollars in his shirt pocket mocked every gentle lie. Then time shattered. Blinding white light carved through the darkness. Metal shrieked against asphalt. A sleek black Mercedes pirouetted through the guardrail like a deadly ballet, its frame crumpling into the muddy ditch below. Steam hissed from the wreckage. Gasoline spread like spilled blood. From somewhere inside that tomb of twisted steel came a woman's voice, fragile as spider silk. "Please, someone help me." Lucas stared at his sleeping daughter, then at the stranger dying 20 feet away. He had no way of knowing that this moment, this choice between safety and sacrifice, would unravel every truth he'd ever believed about the man who destroyed his world. Lucas cut the engine, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Rain hammered the Ford's roof with relentless fury while his calloused fingers hovered over the door handle. 4 heartbeats. 5, 6. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory with crystalline clarity. "Always help others, Lucas. That's how we teach our daughter the difference between right and wrong." But Sarah was gone now, claimed by cancer 18 months ago after a battle that had consumed their savings. He glanced at Chloe in the rearview mirror, her face peaceful in sleep despite the chaos around them. She was innocent of the financial ruin that haunted his every waking moment, unaware that they were 3 days away from having their electricity shut off. The woman in the Mercedes moaned again, weaker this time, her voice barely audible over the storm's symphony. Lucas closed his eyes and saw Sarah's face the last time she'd been conscious. "Promise me you'll always be the man I married." The choice made itself with brutal simplicity. Lucas stepped into the storm, and the world became a nightmare of sensation. Water struck his face like 1,000 ice needles, each drop carrying the weight of winter's promise. His work boots sank into mud that sucked at his ankles with greedy persistence, making every step a battle against the earth itself. The Mercedes lay upside down like a metallic beetle, its roof crushed into an accordion of twisted steel and shattered dreams. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he caught his first clear glimpse of her. Blonde hair matted with blood that looked black in the storm's half-light. Expensive clothes torn and stained beyond recognition. Her breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps that fogged the broken glass with each exhalation. The acrid smell of gasoline burned his nostrils, mixing with the metallic tang of blood and rain-soaked earth. One spark from the damaged electrical system would turn this rescue into a funeral pyre for both of them. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Lucas dropped to his knees beside the driver's side window, feeling glass crunch beneath his weight like broken promises. The woman's eyes fluttered open, pale green, like sea glass polished by decades of waves, but unfocused with pain and shock that ran bone deep. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper that the storm nearly stole from his ears. He pressed closer, catching the faint scent of expensive perfume beneath the overwhelming stench of disaster. Don't call anyone," she breathed, her voice carrying an urgency that cut through her obvious agony like a blade through silk. "Please, I can't." The words dissolved into a cough that brought fresh blood to her lips. Lucas pulled back, studying her face with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces refused to fit together. Even through the blood and bruises, he could see she didn't belong in Cedar Falls. Her jewelry alone, a platinum watch that caught lightning with every flash, probably cost more than he made in 6 months. The passenger side door had been thrown clear during the violent rollover, leaving an opening just wide enough for a desperate man to crawl through. Lucas army crawled into the inverted cabin, his broad shoulders scraping against twisted metal that had once been luxury appointments. The interior reeked of leather and expensive perfume, now tainted with the copper scent of fresh blood and the sharper tang of fear sweat. The woman was trapped, her right leg pinned beneath the collapsed dashboard, like a butterfly caught in a collector's display. Lucas braced his back against what had once been the roof and pushed upward with every ounce of strength his 42-year-old frame could muster. His muscles screamed in protest, tendons straining against the immovable weight of German engineering. Sweat mixed with rain on his forehead as he fought against metal and physics and time. The dashboard shifted exactly 3 inches, barely enough space for hope, but sufficient for her to pull her leg free with a gasp that spoke of pain beyond description. "Thank you," she whispered as he helped her crawl from the wreckage, her voice carrying the cultured accent of boarding schools and trust funds. She leaned heavily against him as they struggled through the ankle-deep mud toward his Ford, her designer heels useless in the primordial soup. Up close, in the intermittent lightning, he could see she was probably 30 years old, with the kind of refined features that suggested private schools and family money stretching back generations. Her clothes were tailored with European precision, a far cry from his thrift store flannel. Something flickered in those sea-glass eyes as she studied his face in the strobing light. Recognition? Fear? Calculation? He couldn't tell, but the expression sent an inexplicable chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the October rain. "We need to get you to a hospital," Lucas said, supporting most of her weight as they approached his battered Ford. She shook her head with violent determination, nearly losing her balance in the process. "No hospitals. Please. I can't." Her voice broke like thin ice under pressure. "I just need somewhere safe to clean up." Chloe was awake when they reached the Ford, her blue eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that childhood brings to every new experience, even disasters. "Daddy, is the lady hurt?" His daughter's voice carried that particular blend of innocence and premature wisdom that children develop when they've witnessed more adult pain than their young hearts should bear. The injured woman slid carefully into the passenger seat, her breath catching sharply as she noticed Chloe's threadbare rabbit with its missing eye and carefully sewn patches. "What's your bunny's name, sweetheart?" she asked, her refined accent now clearly audible without the storm's interference to muffle the careful pronunciation. "Mr. Hopscotch," Chloe replied with the solemnity that 7-year-olds reserve for the most important announcements. "Mommy gave him to me before she went to heaven. He keeps the nightmares away and makes sure I'm never scared when Daddy has to work late." The woman's face transformed completely, hardened edges melting into something approaching tenderness. "He's very handsome," she said quietly, and Lucas heard genuine emotion beneath the polite words. "I bet he's an excellent protector, the best kind of friend a girl could have." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection Lucas couldn't name but recognized as important, like the first note of a song he'd once loved but couldn't quite remember. For just an instant, the stranger looked less like a privileged socialite and more like someone who understood the weight of childhood fears. The drive to Lucas's trailer took 12 agonizing minutes through streets that had transformed into rivers during storms like this one. The woman, she'd introduced herself as Rachel Thompson, though something about the way she said the name suggested it didn't quite fit her like a borrowed coat, remained mostly silent, occasionally glancing at him with an expression he couldn't read. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning mirrors and side windows with the nervous intensity of someone expecting pursuit at any moment. When they pulled into the gravel driveway of Sunset Mobile Home Park, She didn't comment on the peeling paint or the 3 other trailers with blue tarps covering storm-damaged roofs. She simply followed him inside, moving carefully on her injured leg, taking in her surroundings with the focused attention of someone accustomed to evaluating environments. The interior of Lucas's home told the story of a man doing his best with resources that would never be enough. Furniture bought second-hand and maintained with pride, Chloe's artwork covering one wall. "This might sting a little," Lucas warned, retrieving the first aid kit from beneath the bathroom sink and settling beside her with the gentle efficiency born of 2 years spent patching up his daughter's playground injuries. Rachel sat perfectly still, studying his face as he worked, her green eyes tracking every movement with an intensity that made him self-conscious. "You're very kind," she said softly, her voice carrying genuine surprise. "Most people wouldn't have stopped, especially not in weather like this. They'd have driven past and convinced themselves they hadn't seen anything." Lucas paused in his ministrations, considering her words carefully. "Most people weren't raised by Sarah Reed," he replied, focusing on the antiseptic rather than meeting her eyes. "My wife believed in helping others, especially when they couldn't help themselves. She used to say that kindness was the only thing that made the world bearable, that every act of decency was a small victory against the darkness." The past tense hung in the air between them like a weight neither wanted to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Rachel said, her voice carrying genuine warmth that surprised them both. "Where is she now? Working late tonight?" The innocent question struck him like a physical blow, even after 18 months of practice fielding casual inquiries about his family structure. He set down the antiseptic bottle with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly, the small betrayal of emotion more telling than tears would have been. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken grief. "Cancer took her," he said simply, the words coming out flat and rehearsed from countless repetitions. 18 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days ago. Not that I'm counting or anything." The bitter laugh that escaped surprised them both, with its raw edge of grief that time had dulled, but not eliminated. "Some nights I still set 2 plates out of habit. Chloe pretends not to notice when I have to put one back." The admission slipped out before he could stop it, more honest than he'd been with anyone since the funeral. As he continued bandaging her wounds with careful precision, Rachel asked gentle questions about their life with the kind of genuine interest that wealthy people rarely showed for the struggles of the working poor. His work, plumbing mostly, with occasional construction projects when his former colleagues at Henderson Construction threw him scraps of charity that felt like crumbs from a table he'd once helped set. Chloe's school, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, like the kind woman who'd helped their neighbor's sick cat. The way they managed on macaroni and cheese 4 nights a week while he saved every spare dollar. He found himself talking more freely than he had with anyone since Sarah's funeral, drawn out by Rachel's obvious intelligence and what seemed like genuine concern for their modest struggles and small victories. There was something about her attention that felt different from the polite interest most people showed. She listened with the intensity of someone who understood that other people's lives mattered, that their small dramas and quiet triumphs deserved respect and consideration rather than casual dismissal. "What about you?" he asked as he finished with the last bandage, his curiosity finally overcoming his natural reticence with strangers. "What brings someone like you to our little corner of nowhere at this time of night?" The question hung in the air for several long seconds, while various emotions played across her face, like clouds across the moon. Rachel's eyes flickered with something that looked suspiciously like panic before she answered with the smooth delivery of someone accustomed to deflecting personal inquiries. "Business meeting in Springfield ran later than expected. I was trying to avoid the worst of the traffic by taking back roads when the storm hit." Another lie. delivered smoothly but not quite smoothly enough to fool someone who'd heard thousands of them from clients trying to explain why they couldn't pay their bills this month. The explanation was plausible enough, but something about her body language suggested depths of deception that made him wary despite his natural inclination to trust people until they proved unworthy. Chloe had fallen asleep on the floor beside the couch sometime during their conversation, using Mr. Hopscotch as a pillow, while the storm raged outside their fragile sanctuary. Rachel watched her with an expression of such profound longing that Lucas felt his protective instincts stir like sleeping guard dogs. "Do you have children?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice low to avoid waking his daughter. She shook her head slowly, never taking her eyes from Chloe's peaceful face. "No, my life hasn't. It hasn't allowed for that kind of happiness," she said, her voice carrying sadness that suggested depths of regret he couldn't begin to fathom. "But seeing her, seeing how you are with her, it's beautiful. She's incredibly lucky to have you as a father. You can see it in everything about her, the confidence, the security, the absolute certainty that she's loved." The observation was delivered with the wistful tone of someone looking through a window at a life they'd never been allowed to live. Lucas carefully lifted Chloe and carried her to her small bedroom, tucking her beneath the quilt Sarah had sewn during her final remission, a burst of optimistic color in a world that had grown too dark too quickly. When he returned to the living room, he found Rachel standing at the window, staring out at the storm with tears tracking down her cheeks like silver rivers. She quickly wiped them away when she heard his footsteps, composing herself with visible effort that spoke of long practice, hiding emotion. "I should call someone," she said, without turning from the window, her voice carefully neutral. "Let them know I'm safe, that I wasn't seriously hurt in the accident." But she made no move toward her phone, which had somehow survived the crash intact, its expensive case protecting it from the violence that had destroyed everything else. The contradiction between her words and actions wasn't lost on Lucas, adding another layer to the growing mystery of who this woman really was. "You're welcome to stay until the storm passes," Lucas offered, settling into the armchair across from where she'd been sitting, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The couch pulls out into a bed. It's not much, but it's dry and warm, and tomorrow's forecast calls for clear skies. Rachel turned from the window, and in the lamplight he could see how young she really was beneath the exhaustion and fear that had aged her face beyond her years. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked, her voice carrying weight beyond its simple words. "You don't know anything about me. I could be anyone, a criminal, a drug addict, someone dangerous. For all you know, I'm running from the law, and helping me could ruin your life." The question seemed to surprise her as much as it did him, as if she'd intended to think it but not speak it aloud. Lucas considered her words seriously, recognizing the genuine confusion behind them. "Because 18 months ago a stranger held my wife's hand in the oncology ward while I filled out insurance paperwork that wouldn't save her life, but might at least preserve our dignity," he said finally, his voice steady despite the pain the memory brought. "I never even got her name, but she stayed with Sarah for 2 hours, talking about her garden and her grandchildren, making my wife laugh during what turned out to be the worst day of our lives. When I came back, Sarah told me that woman had made her feel less alone in facing the darkness." "That's different," Rachel protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "That woman chose to help someone in a hospital, a safe place with doctors and nurses nearby. You risked your life for someone you'd never seen before, in the middle of nowhere, during a storm that could have killed you both." Her words carried an undertone of something that might have been self-recrimination, as if she were cataloguing her own unworthiness for such sacrifice from a complete stranger. Lucas shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with praise that felt undeserved. My father taught me that character isn't what you do when people are watching, when there's something to be gained or lost by your choices. It's what you do when nobody would ever know the difference, when there's no reward except the knowledge that you acted according to your principles. He paused, studying her face carefully. Besides, I get the feeling you're running from something that scares you more than a car accident. Sometimes a safe place to rest is the most valuable thing you can offer someone. Rachel's carefully maintained composure finally cracked like ice under sudden pressure. Tears came in earnest now, and she buried her face in her hands with the abandon of someone who'd been holding back emotion for far too long. You have no idea how complicated this is, she whispered between sobs that shook her entire frame. If my father finds out where I am, what I'm trying to do, he'll destroy me, and anyone who's helped me. He has the power to ruin lives with a phone call, to make people disappear from their jobs, their communities. The fear in her voice was real and raw, carrying the weight of someone who'd lived their entire life under the shadow of threats, both implicit and explicit. Lucas moved to the couch, settling beside her at a respectful distance, offering presence without pressure. "Want to talk about it?" he asked gently, his voice carrying the same tone he used when Chloe woke from nightmares. "Sometimes sharing the burden makes it lighter, and I'm pretty good at keeping secrets when they need keeping." For a moment that stretched toward eternity, he thought she might tell him everything. Her mouth opened, words forming and dissolving before they could be spoken like morning mist in sunlight. He could see the battle playing out across her features, the desperate need for connection warring with whatever fears kept her secrets locked away. Then she shook her head with obvious regret, composing herself with the visible effort of someone reassembling a carefully constructed mask. "I can't," she said finally, her voice steady but hollow. "It wouldn't be fair to you or Chloe. Some problems are too big to share, too dangerous to speak aloud. The less you know, the safer you'll be when this is all over." But even as she spoke the words of dismissal, her eyes drifted to his collection of Henderson Construction Awards, gathering dust on a shelf, company recognition for projects completed before his termination 2 years ago. Something flickered in her expression, a moment of recognition that she quickly suppressed. The next morning brought pale sunlight filtering through rain-washed windows and the conspicuous absence of Rachel Thompson. Lucas found her note on the kitchen table, written in elegant script. "Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist in a world that often seems determined to prove otherwise. I'll never forget your kindness or the warmth of your home. Please don't try to find me, for your own safety and Chloe's. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." Beside the note lay 5 crisp $100 bills and a hotel business card, with nothing but a phone number written in careful handwriting. "Where's the nice lady, Daddy?" Chloe asked over breakfast, her 7-year-old heart already missing the stranger who'd shown such gentle interest in Mr. Hopscotch and her stories about school. Lucas stared at the money, more cash than he'd seen at one time since before Sarah's illness consumed their savings, and felt a complex mixture of gratitude and unease that made his stomach clench with dread. The bills were clean, sequential, the kind of money that came from banks rather than cash registers. "She had to go home, Princess," he told his daughter, folding the money carefully and tucking it into his wallet, where it felt like a burning secret. "But she wanted me to tell you that you're very special, and Mr. Hopscotch is the bravest bunny she's ever met." The explanation satisfied Chloe's immediate curiosity, but Lucas couldn't shake the growing certainty that Rachel's story was far from over, that their brief intersection had set forces in motion that would reshape both their lives. 3 days later, the first concrete sign of trouble materialized in the form of 2 men in expensive suits, asking pointed questions at Murphy's diner during the lunch rush. They claimed to be insurance investigators looking into the Mercedes accident, flashing credentials that looked official enough to satisfy casual inspection, but raised red flags for anyone who'd learned to spot corporate intimidation tactics. Their questions focused less on vehicle damage and policy coverage, and more on the woman who'd been driving and who might have helped her after the crash. Big Jim Murphy called that evening with a warning that made Lucas's blood run cold. "They didn't look like insurance men to me, Luke," Jim said, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen enough corporate strong-arm tactics to recognize the real thing. "More like private security, the kind that rich families hire when they want problems to disappear quietly and permanently. The kind that don't take no for an answer, and don't care much about collateral damage when they're hunting for something." "What did you tell them?" Lucas asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. "Same thing I told everyone else who asked. I was too busy with the dinner rush to notice anything unusual, and I don't make a habit of keeping track of every car that drives past my windows during a storm." Jim paused meaningfully. "But Luke, whatever that girl was running from, it's got serious money and serious reach behind it. You better watch yourself and that little girl of yours." The phone call came Thursday night, well after Chloe was asleep and the trailer park had settled into its usual evening quiet. Lucas almost didn't answer. The number was blocked, and his experience with late-night calls had taught him they rarely brought good news to single fathers struggling to make ends meet. But something made him pick up on the fourth ring. Some instinct that this conversation would be important in ways he couldn't yet understand. Silence stretched for several heartbeats, long enough for him to wonder if it was a wrong number or a prank call. Then, "It's Rachel." Her voice was different now, strained, urgent, carrying the edge of someone operating under extreme pressure and running on very little sleep. "Are you safe? Has anyone come asking questions about me? About the accident?" The words tumbled out before he could respond, revealing a level of anxiety that made his own growing fears seem entirely justified. "Some men were asking around town," Lucas admitted, settling into his chair and lowering his voice to avoid waking Chloe in the next room. "They claimed to be insurance investigators, but Jim Murphy thinks they were private security of some kind. Professional muscle with official-looking credentials and questions that had nothing to do with insurance claims." Rachel's sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line confirmed his worst suspicions about the true nature of their visitors. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and he could hear genuine anguish in her voice that went far beyond polite regret. "I never meant to put you in danger, to drag you and Chloe into something this complicated and dangerous. I hoped they wouldn't be able to connect us, that one night would be too brief to leave a trail they could follow back to your doorstep." Her words carried the weight of someone who'd underestimated forces beyond her control and was now watching innocent people pay the price. "Who are they, Rachel?" Lucas asked quietly, using her name deliberately to remind them both that whatever deception lay between them, this conversation required honesty if it was going to serve any useful purpose. "What kind of trouble are you in that has men in expensive suits hunting you like a fugitive from justice?" The question hung in the silence like a challenge, and he could almost hear her internal struggle as she weighed truth against safety. Another pause stretched between them, long enough for Lucas to wonder if she'd hung up or if the connection had failed. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried the hollow tone of someone who'd made a terrible decision and had to live with the consequences every waking moment. The kind that destroys innocent people just for being kind, just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The kind that has infinite resources and no conscience about using them against anyone who gets in the way. "Stay away from anyone connected to Henderson Construction," she continued with startling specificity that made his blood freeze in his veins. Don't take any jobs from them. Don't socialize with former employees. Don't even drive past their offices if you can avoid it. Promise me that much, at least. Promise me you'll keep yourself and Chloe as far away from that company as possible. The warning hit him like a physical blow, connecting dots he'd been trying not to see since she'd first glanced at his awards with that moment of recognition. The specificity of her warning sent chills down Lucas's spine, like ice water. Henderson Construction, the company that had destroyed his career and left him scrambling for survival in a town where everyone knew their version of events. Why Henderson Construction? He pressed, pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to click into place in his mind with sickening clarity. What do they have to do with a car accident and a woman running from her father? But the line was already dead, leaving him with more questions than answers. The next morning brought revelations that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about justice and coincidence. At exactly noon, Lucas sat in his parked truck, radio tuned to the local news station. This is Channel 7 News, with breaking developments in what sources are calling the Henderson family crisis. We can now confirm that Rachel Henderson, daughter of construction magnate James Henderson and former chief financial officer of Henderson Construction, has been missing for 6 days following what witnesses describe as a violent confrontation with her father. Lucas pulled over to the curb, his hands shaking as the full weight of revelation crashed over him. Rachel Henderson, not Thompson. The daughter of the man who had systematically destroyed his life, who had spread carefully crafted rumors about Lucas's ethical violations, until no construction company in 3 counties would hire him. The Princess of Cedar Falls's most powerful family had been slumming in his trailer while her father's investigators hunted her. The radio continued. The 29-year-old Stanford MBA allegedly threatened to expose what she termed systematic corruption and fraud within Henderson Construction before disappearing. Sources suggest she may have been in possession of internal documents that could implicate the company in numerous incidents of contract fraud, tax evasion, and deliberate safety violations dating back at least 5 years. Lucas turned off the radio, every kindness he'd shown now recast in the harsh light of deception and family betrayal. His phone rang. Chloe's school. Mr. Reed, this is Principal Morrison. I'm afraid there's been a serious incident that requires your immediate attention. The formal tone made his stomach drop. 2 men claiming to be federal agents attempted to check Chloe out of school early this morning. When we asked for proper identification and verification through official channels, they became agitated and left quickly without providing any additional information. I've called the police, but I thought you should know immediately. Lucas was already starting the truck before she finished speaking, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal desperate for escape. I'm on my way. Don't let anyone near her until I get there. The drive to Westfield Elementary took exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, a personal record that left rubber marks on 3 corners and his heart threatening to burst from his chest with terror and rage in equal measure. He found Chloe in the principal's office, pale but physically unharmed, clutching Mr. Hopscotch with white-knuckled intensity. They said they were friends of the nice lady, she told him in a voice that seemed smaller than her 7 years should allow. But they didn't seem nice at all, Daddy. They had scary eyes, and they kept looking around like they were hunting for something. They made my teacher nervous, too. The fear in her voice made his protective instincts roar to life. Principal Morrison showed Lucas the security footage. 2 men in dark suits with professional demeanor, but something indefinably wrong about their approach. The police said they'll increase patrols around the school and the neighborhood, Morrison assured him. But honestly, Mr. Reed, if these men are willing to impersonate federal agents to get access to a child, I'm not sure what we're dealing with or how far they're willing to go. That night, after Chloe was safely asleep with her bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle, a precaution that broke his heart to implement, Lucas called the number Rachel had given him. It went straight to a generic voicemail recording. "This is Lucas," he said after the beep, his voice shaking with fury he'd never felt before. "They came after my daughter today, at her school. Men pretending to be federal agents, trying to take a 7-year-old child to get to you. If anything happens to Chloe because of this mess, there won't be anywhere in the world you can hide from me." The return call came at exactly 2 a.m. "I know," Rachel said before he could speak, her voice carrying hollow exhaustion. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I never wanted this to happen, never imagined they'd be so desperate as to target a child. They're using you to get to me, and I can't bear the thought of Chloe being hurt because of my family's sins." He could hear genuine anguish that seemed to encompass years of suppressed guilt. "What does your father want?" Lucas demanded, his voice rough with exhaustion and fear. "What's worth threatening an innocent child to get?" The question hung between them like an accusation, and he could hear Rachel's breathing change, becoming more labored as if she were fighting for each word, struggling against invisible weights that pressed down on her chest. "Me back under his control," she replied with devastating honesty. "And the evidence I took when I left the company destroyed before it can do any more damage to his empire. He built Henderson Construction on lies and corruption, and I have proof of crimes that go back years. Proof that could send him to prison and destroy everything he's worked his entire life to build." The admission hung between them like a confession. "What evidence?" he pressed, though part of him dreaded the answer. Rachel's silence stretched so long he wondered if she'd hung up. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Proof that Henderson Construction has been defrauding clients and endangering workers for years, including complete documentation of the smear campaign they ran against certain former employees who asked too many questions about safety violations. Employees like you, Lucas. The evidence that proves you were innocent of everything they accused you of." The words hit him like physical blows. "You have proof that I was set up?" The question came out as a broken whisper. "Yes," she said simply. "I have email chains, financial records, recorded conversations, everything my father thought he'd destroyed when he had your computer wiped and your security access revoked. I know exactly why he targeted you, and it had nothing to do with ethical violations or professional incompetence." For 2 years, Lucas had believed himself guilty of the lapses Henderson had accused him of. He'd replayed every decision, questioned every judgment call, wondered what he'd done wrong. The revelation that it had all been lies, calculated deception designed to protect criminal enterprise, shattered something fundamental inside him. Not just his heart, but his understanding of justice and truth. "Why me?" The question emerged as a broken whisper. "You discovered discrepancies in the Riverside Mall project," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Materials being billed that were never delivered, safety inspections signed off on equipment that was never installed. You brought it to my father's attention like the honest man you are, expecting him to investigate. Instead, he decided you were a threat to be eliminated." She paused to compose herself. "You knew too much, asked too many questions, had too much integrity to be bought off or intimidated into silence. So he created a fiction about ethical violations, planted evidence in your files, and spread rumors that made you unemployable. It was systematic character assassination designed to discredit you before you could expose the truth." The weight of her words rewrote his entire adult life. "What are you going to do with this evidence?" he asked finally. "What I should have done 3 years ago when I first discovered what kind of man I was working for," Rachel replied, her voice growing stronger with determination. "Turn it over to the FBI, the State Attorney General, anyone who will listen and has the power to act. But first I have to make sure you and Chloe are safe, because my father won't hesitate to hurt innocent people if it serves his purposes." "How do we end this?" Lucas asked, looking toward his daughter's bedroom. There has to be a way to stop him before someone gets hurt. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, and he could almost hear her weighing options and calculating risks. "There is a way," she said finally. "But it means trusting me one more time, even after everything I've put you through. And it means letting me come back into your lives when every instinct probably tells you to run." Despite everything, the deception, the danger, the way his world had been turned upside down, Lucas found himself considering her proposal. The alternative was a life spent looking over his shoulder, wondering when Henderson's reach would find them again. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly, committing himself to a course of action that felt simultaneously inevitable and terrifying. The plan Rachel outlined was simultaneously simple and terrifying. She would return to Cedar Falls openly, accompanied by federal investigators and armed with enough evidence to ensure James Henderson's empire crumbled permanently. But first, she needed Lucas to accept a job offer from Henderson Construction that would come within 48 hours. "They'll offer you your old position back at significantly higher pay," she explained with confidence. "He's desperate to appear legitimate right now. Rehiring a formerly disgraced employee would be perfect public relations." "You're asking me to walk into the lion's den with my daughter's life hanging in the balance," Lucas said flatly. "I'm asking you to help me finish what should have been done years ago," Rachel corrected. "And I'm promising you that within 2 weeks of accepting that job, James Henderson will be in federal custody. It's the only way to guarantee your long-term safety. As long as he's free and powerful, you'll always be a potential target." When Henderson Construction called offering him a senior project manager position at twice his previous salary, Lucas accepted with surprising calmness. "Mr. Reed," said James Henderson himself, his voice carrying smooth confidence, "I'm pleased we can put our past difficulties behind us. These are challenging times, and we need experienced professionals we can trust implicitly." The irony of being called trustworthy by the man who had destroyed his reputation was almost too much to bear. Monday morning found him walking into Henderson Construction headquarters for the first time in 2 years. The building hadn't changed. 30 stories of glass and steel dominating Cedar Falls' skyline. James Henderson's office occupied the entire northeast corner, with commanding views of the city he'd shaped through 3 decades of construction projects, both legitimate and fraudulent. The man himself was smaller than Lucas remembered, still imposing but somehow diminished by age and the weight of maintaining an empire built on lies. "Lucas," Henderson said, rising to extend a hand, "adversity has obviously agreed with you. There's something to be said for the character-building properties of honest work and financial struggle." The comment carried multiple layers of cruelty, acknowledging both the hardships he'd caused and his pleasure in having inflicted them. "Your new position will involve comprehensive oversight of our residential development projects, with particular attention to cost control and quality assurance," Henderson continued. "Given your previous concerns about certain construction practices, I thought you'd appreciate the chance to implement the highest possible standards." Each word dripped with mock consideration for Lucas's supposedly overcautious nature. Henderson was placing him in a position where he'd be expected to overlook the same violations that had gotten him fired. As Lucas prepared to leave, Henderson added one final comment that chilled him. "I hope you'll remember that Henderson Construction has always taken excellent care of its loyal employees, just as we deal appropriately with those who prove disloyal. I trust that won't be an issue going forward." The words were delivered with pleasant tone, making them infinitely more threatening than any direct warning. The next few days passed in careful preparation. Lucas documented the corruption Rachel had described, finding evidence everywhere. Safety reports routinely falsified, materials billed but never delivered, workers endangered by equipment that existed only on paper. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering in its breadth and callous disregard for human life. Friday afternoon brought Agent Williams' promised call. We'll be picking you and your daughter up tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pack light. Just essentials for a few days. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home 40 miles from Cedar Falls. Agent Chen met them with pizza and reassuring smiles. "Sorry for the disruption to your weekend," he said, as Chloe explored the temporary accommodations. "Monday morning should wrap everything up nicely." Sunday passed quietly with board games and careful answers to Chloe's questions about their temporary guardians. Agent Williams provided regular updates, surveillance teams were in position, search warrants had been finalized, and Rachel was reviewing final evidence packages with federal prosecutors. Everything was proceeding according to plan. She assured them with professional confidence that helped ease Lucas's lingering anxiety. Monday morning brought the news they'd all been waiting for. At exactly 8:30, Williams's radio crackled with the message that would change everything. "Package delivered. All targets in custody." James Henderson and 12 of his senior executives were under arrest. Henderson Construction's offices were being searched by teams of federal investigators armed with enough evidence to ensure convictions. "It's over," Williams told Lucas with visible relief that spoke of sleepless nights and carefully controlled fear. "Ms. Henderson asked me to tell you that you and Chloe are completely safe now. Her father's organization has been dismantled, and there's no one left with the motivation or resources to threaten you." Lucas sank into a chair, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion that left him feeling like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. 3 months later, Lucas stood in front of Reed Construction, the company he'd founded with his settlement from Henderson Construction's bankruptcy proceedings. Federal prosecutors had been generous in compensating the victims of James Henderson's fraud, and Lucas had used his share wisely. He employed 8 people now, including several former Henderson workers who'd lost their jobs when the company collapsed, but had found something better in honest work. "Daddy, look!" Chloe called from the sidewalk, where she was examining a butterfly that had landed on her backpack. At 8 years old, she was taller, more confident, and utterly secure in the knowledge that her father could handle any problem the world might present. She had no memory of the men who'd tried to take her from school, no understanding of the danger they'd escaped. To her, the past 3 months had been an exciting time of new adventures. "Beautiful butterfly, princess," Lucas agreed, walking over to admire the delicate creature. As he did, he noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the street. Rachel looked different again. Casual clothes, comfortable shoes, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like someone who'd finally learned to dress for herself rather than corporate expectations or family image. "Hello, Lucas," she said softly. "Congratulations on the new business. I heard you're doing very well." She looked peaceful, centered in a way she'd never seemed before. "How are you adjusting to civilian life?" Lucas asked gently. It was a way of asking about the dramatic changes in her circumstances, from corporate heiress to independent woman starting over with nothing but a clear conscience. "Better than I expected," Rachel admitted with a genuine smile. "I'm teaching 3rd grade at Westfield Elementary now. It turns out I love working with children." She glanced at Chloe, who was now chasing the butterfly around the sidewalk. "Your daughter's getting so big, and she looks happy." There was wistfulness in her voice, the eternal regret of someone who'd missed precious time due to circumstances beyond her control. "She is happy," Lucas confirmed. "And safe. That's worth more than all the money in the world." The statement carried layers of meaning they both understood. Rachel's sacrifice had purchased something invaluable, the assurance that Chloe could grow up without fear, surrounded by love and protected by truth rather than threatened by lies and corruption. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Chloe play while autumn leaves drifted around them like gentle reminders of time's passage. Finally, Rachel spoke again. "I was wondering, would you and Chloe like to have dinner sometime? Nothing complicated, just I'd like to get to know you both properly. without all the drama and danger. Her request was tentative, hopeful, but prepared for rejection. Lucas considered the invitation carefully. In the months since Henderson's arrest, he'd thought often about the woman who'd risked everything to set things right. Not the frightened fugitive from the storm, not the corporate whistleblower fighting her father's empire, but simply Rachel, intelligent, compassionate, genuinely caring despite the privileged background that might have made her callous. "I'd like that," he said finally. "But I should warn you, Chloe's going to want to show you her entire collection of stuffed animals. It's quite extensive now." Rachel replied with the first truly relaxed laugh he'd heard from her. "I look forward to meeting all of them, especially Mr. Hopscotch. I owe him a proper thank you for being such a good protector." As she spoke, Chloe noticed her presence and ran over with the unself-conscious joy of a child greeting a beloved friend. "Miss Rachel! Daddy, it's Miss Rachel!" She launched herself into Rachel's arms with complete trust, as if the months of separation had been merely days. "Oh, sweetheart, you have grown! Are you still taking such good care of Mr. Hopscotch?" Chloe nodded enthusiastically and launched into a detailed account of her rabbit's recent adventures. Watching them together, Lucas felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of protective barriers he'd maintained since Sarah's death, a cautious willingness to consider possibilities he'd thought were permanently closed. Rachel wasn't Sarah, could never replace the woman he'd loved for 15 years, but she was something else entirely, a chance for new beginnings, different adventures, and the kind of unexpected joy that sometimes emerges from the darkest circumstances. "So," he said when Chloe's narrative finally wound down, "how about dinner this Saturday? Nothing fancy, just the three of us and whatever takeout Chloe demands." Rachel's smile could have powered the entire city. "It's a date," she said, then blushed at her choice of words. "I mean, it's a plan, a dinner plan, with friends." Her flustered correction was endearing in its awkwardness. As they parted ways that afternoon, Rachel returning to her small apartment near the school, Lucas and Chloe heading home to their new house in a neighborhood where safety was measured in good schools and friendly neighbors, Lucas felt lighter than he had in years. The future stretched ahead like an empty canvas, ready for whatever colors they chose to paint across it. That evening, as he tucked Chloe into her new bed in her new room, she looked up at him with eyes that held Sarah's intelligence, but were uniquely her own. "Daddy, are you happy?" she asked with the directness children used to cut through adult complexity. "Yes, princess," he replied, realizing as he said it that it was completely true. "I'm very happy. Are you?" She nodded sleepily, already drifting toward dreams where butterflies danced and rabbits stood guard against nightmares that would never come. Lucas stood in her doorway for a long moment after she fell asleep, listening to her peaceful breathing and marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. 18 months ago, he'd been a broken man struggling to survive, convinced he'd lost everything worth having except his daughter's love. Tonight, he was a successful businessman with a bright future, surrounded by friends who valued his integrity and cautiously exploring the possibility of love with a woman who'd proven her character under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Sometimes, he reflected, the storms that seemed most destructive cleared the way for entirely new landscapes. Sometimes helping a stranger in distress led to discoveries about yourself that changed everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, taking the hardest road led to destinations more wonderful than you'd ever dared to imagine. As he turned off Chloe's light and headed toward his own room, Lucas found himself looking forward to Saturday dinner with an anticipation he hadn't felt since before Sarah's illness. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not just he and Chloe, but perhaps all three of them, building something new from the ashes of what had come before. The future was unwritten, full of infinite possibility, and for the first time in years, that felt like a gift rather than a burden.